WWE planning a major debut, plus so many more creative plans are being revealed. We're going to talk about it in today's video. As always, I'll put the timestamps in the description down below. I actually want to kick things off with Drew McIntyre. Now, we've talked about Drew McIntyre several times in the last several months on this channel. For those who don't know, long story short, it's been reported several times that Drew McIntyre and WWE are reportedly far apart on money. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this today is because WWE decided to remove Drew McIntyre from the Money in the Bank advertising. Now, keep in mind, at one point, they actually removed Roman Reigns from the advertising, added him back on there. Now, the reason why I'm actually talking about this is for a very, very big reason, and that is because historically, when you look at Endeavor buying the UFC, we saw a lot of the top names in the UFC just walk away, right? If they weren't getting paid what they wanted, if they weren't getting the contracts that they wanted, they just walked out. The most notable name to do that is Francis Ngannou, who is one of the more dominant heavyweight champions of all time, one of the most dominant champions regardless of weight class in the UFC. And he walked away. Now he's actually having a hard time finding another place to work. ONE FC, Bellator, PFL, everybody's kind of wondering where he goes next. Nonetheless, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Drew McIntyre is kind of like in the same boat, right? According to the reports. Now, I, for one, don't know if I actually believe these reports. I'm going to be honest with you. And the reason why I have a hard time believing any of these reports is for one major reason, and that is because WWE actually decided to draft Drew McIntyre to Raw. Plus, there's also been reports suggesting that WWE wants to use Drew McIntyre as a heel on WWE Raw, being involved in the World Heavyweight Championship picture, which I actually believe is the right move. Now, in previous videos, I've said, look, Drew McIntyre going to AEW or New Japan, like, I'd be okay with it. But deep down, the more and more that I think about it, I look at WWE Raw, and I look at some of those main event names, and I think there's a lot of potential there. But when I'm looking at top heels to exist on WWE Raw, I think WWE needs Drew McIntyre. So as much as I would be fine with him going elsewhere, he has to stay in WWE. And I just don't know if I'm convinced enough that Drew McIntyre would actually leave WWE. I think the big question mark here is Endeavor, because it hasn't finished. The merger hasn't finished. But what type of influence will they have with WWE on their actual roster? And I think that is a very credible question to ask. I think that's a very sincere question to ask, considering that when they bought the UFC, we saw how so much changed. Now, with WWE, and more specifically, Drew McIntyre, would he walk away from the WWE? Are those reports even true? Is this one of those things where dirt sheets are being fed reports on Drew McIntyre to get people to hate on Drew McIntyre to make his heel turn effective? We've seen this happen several times in wrestling in the last few years, regardless of the company. So I think that is very well a possibility as well. Guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about Conor McGregor. We're staying on pace with the UFC stuff, but Conor McGregor, he's teased this so many times. He's teased coming into WWE so many times, but now he is back at it on Twitter. He is just taking a piss on everything regarding Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman. And he says he'll pull up to SummerSlam, right? And you know, here's the thing. I think Conor McGregor is such a massive name in the UFC. And I really knew he was a massive name in the UFC when I would go to like watch parties with friends, and people who don't watch UFC would be like, oh, well, is that Conor McGregor guy fighting, right? That just goes to show you, regardless if he wins or loses, which, by the way, in his last several fights, if you don't watch the UFC, Conor McGregor has definitely not been a winner. I think he's a hell of a talent. I think he's a hell of a fighter. I just think at this point, he could potentially be past his prime. At the end of the day, Conor McGregor is very, very good in the octagon, but as time goes on, there's other people that exist that do really well, and he's been at it for a long time. And I don't think there is anything wrong with that if Conor McGregor actually chose to go full-time into WWE. Now, with that being said, I do want to be very clear. If Conor McGregor were to actually go into WWE, I don't know what his skill set would be, but I do know he would be absolutely incredible on the microphone. I do know that for sure. And I think he would be able to connect with the WWE universe on a very, very good level. However, one thing I never considered was SummerSlam. And I'm going to SummerSlam. I'm going to SummerSlam, floor seats. I'm looking at this as an incredible experience of like, okay, cool, we'll get some Bloodline stuff, we'll get this, we'll get that. Not once did I actually think about celebrity involvement. I didn't even think about Logan Paul. I didn't think about a lot of these guys. But now that I'm thinking about it, I keep forgetting that SummerSlam is like the second WrestleMania, right? So because this pay-per-view has become such a massive pay-per-view, Conor McGregor showing up to WWE would make a lot of sense. And then to glue it all together, you have Endeavor who can help facilitate that. And Conor's been very outspoken about Endeavor and WWE. Now he's been very outspoken with Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns. Listen, man, you want to get people talking, you bring in Conor McGregor. I mean, that's just the reality. Guys, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Roman Reigns. In this case, WWE has some very, very big plans for the Bloodline. And this has been something that's been talked about for a while, obviously because of the WWE draft. I know one of the members of my Discord server, which, by the way, if you guys aren't in the Discord, check it out. You guys could go and join. It's completely free. But one of the members asked me about this. They said, hey, Ango, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is pretty legit? And honestly, I do. I think this is a very legit report. So for those who don't know, Slice Wrestling came out with a report that says the Bloodline and the Judgment Day are to be the top acts on Raw and SmackDown. They provided some backstage details, basically suggesting that WWE is planning to push both stables, more championship accolades. WWE wants to keep the Bloodline and the Judgment Day dominant on their own brands and stack up wins in their own matches. And then another thing about this was because of the fact that, you know, they're high merch sellers, which, by the way, keep in mind, LWO, the Bloodline, Judgment Day, Maximum Male Models. I mean, you got so many groups at this point, it's kind of hard to keep up with. But there are a lot of groups in the WWE, and you know, you got the Viking Raiders, and you got them with Valhalla. You got all of these teams, right? When you look at the WWE, having one really, really dominant faction on Raw and one really, really dominant faction on SmackDown is actually a good idea, especially when you have the smaller groups of guys. So, for example, on SmackDown, even though they don't exist yet, the Hurt Business is still rumored to be a thing. Bobby Lashley got drafted to SmackDown. Omos, Shelton, Cedric are all free agents. They can actually make this happen if they choose to. But if you want to go into the brand warfare, right, between Raw and SmackDown, you could actually have a lot of groups compete against each other at Survivor Series, which I think is great. The idea that WWE wants the Judgment Day to be the top act on Raw is really exciting, and the reason for that is because WWE has been rumored to bring in a new member. In this case, JD McDonough, which I don't know how this became a thing. I know I've talked about this several times. I know JD from New York has talked about this several times. I know people in my Discord have talked about this so many times. There are a lot of people who would love to see JD McDonough on the Judgment Day because of the overall natural fit that he would have within the group. And then what's really crazy is that according to Boozer666, Boozer Wrestling, if you guys don't know who this is one of those new Twitter accounts that have popped up and has nailed absolutely everything correctly in the past 2 weeks or so. They have absolutely been killing it in terms of reporting stuff. Now, this hasn't been yet approved according to the tweet, but JD McDonough for Judgment Day is being discussed heavily, however, not yet approved. Now, WWE adding JD McDonough to the Judgment Day would help solidify the Judgment Day as a serious group. Now, the thing is, and this is the real thing, like this is the asterisk, right? Like I'm throwing the asterisk on this. If WWE is looking at making the Judgment Day the more dominant faction, I've said before, Damian Priest would make a hell of a world champion. At the same time, Finn Balor would make a hell of a champion, right? He could be world heavyweight champion. I would definitely be okay with those two guys becoming world champion at some point. Then you also have a potential tag team division that needs to flourish. Dom Mysterio can always tag team with JD McDonough, temporarily. Again, it just gives him somebody to work with. You can do that. If you want them to be in the mid-card and going for singles titles, JD McDonough versus Walter could be an absolute sick thing. And by the way, when I forgot about all of those factions that exist, Imperium on Raw, right? So if you have Imperium on Raw, then the cool thing is you could do Imperium versus Judgment Day. You could do JD McDonough versus Walter, Gunther, whatever. So my point is WWE obviously has a lot of stuff being planned. It looks like WWE's back to long-term planning. We'll see what happens, but I'll keep you guys updated along the way. Nonetheless, I'm excited. WWE, AEW, everybody's doing some cool shit right now, and I'm going to keep watching. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.